Hi, this is Mac of Mac's List. Find Your Dream Job is presented by Mac's List, an online community where you can find free resources for your job search, plus online courses and books that help you advance your career. My latest book is called Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. It's a reference guide for your career that covers all aspects of the job search, including expert advice in every chapter. You can get the first chapter for free by visiting maxlist.org/anywhere. This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Leila O'Hara and Jessica Black from the Mac's List team. This week, we're talking about how to build your network strategically. We talk about the importance of networking a lot on this podcast. Most jobs get filled by word of mouth, and networking offers you the best way to uncover and land these hidden jobs that employers never advertise. Our guest expert this week is Sara Holtz. She says to find the job you want, you need a strategy for how to build your network. Sara and I talk later in the show. You're about to graduate from college, or maybe you're ready to change jobs. But here's your problem. You're not certain what kind of job you want. Leila has found a book that shows you how to set both job search and career goals. It offers a practical set of steps you can use to figure out what you want to do next. She tells us more in a moment. You lose your job because your company downsizes. It's not your fault. But will hiring managers hold your unemployment against you? That's our question of the week. It comes from listener Jenna Paulson here in Portland, Oregon. Jessica shares her advice shortly. First, as always, let's check in with the Mac's List team. We're here in the studio with Leila and Jessica. And Leila, you're up first because every week you're out there poking around the internet looking for resources our listeners can use, whether it's websites, books, tools. I think this week you found a book for us, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. This week I've got a really great book for job seekers everywhere, and it's called The Pathfinder: How to Choose or Change Your Career for a Lifetime of Satisfaction and Success, and it's by Nicholas Lohr. So this book is for anyone that finds themselves needing more direction in determining their next career move. And it breaks down the process of finding your dream job into a really clear, step-by-step guide, which I found really helpful because I'm kind of that to-do list.
Yes.
Map it out, sticky note, step-by-step person.
I think we have a lot of linear people around this table, the three of us.
We do.
Yeah.
I'm not super linear, but I do love a good to-do list. And I also think that breaking down the nebulous sort of idea of a dream job into actionable steps is really helpful for anyone who feels really lost or confused or just stuck and not knowing where to go next. I think having things like this that is a guidepost is really helpful. So I really appreciate this.
Yeah, I think it'll be really helpful for listeners. And one method the book explores in detail is the Rockport career design method, which I'd never heard of before. And it's divided into 3 main stages, which are investigate, decide, and design. And phase 1 is investigating and gathering clues or insights about yourself, which are broken down into 3 main areas. One is who you are, which is what are your talents, what's your personality, what are your skills and your passions. The second component is why you work, which is what gives you meaning and what are your personal and professional goals. And then the third component it wants you to think about is where you work, which is what work environment do you want to be in? What professional environment do you see yourself working in? And then once you've identified those 3 components, you can move on to identifying what it calls your definite components. Now, these are anything that are basically must-haves that you really need to have in your future career. And they can be any statement that you want. So these are a couple examples. One is, I will work remotely and move around daily, and I won't be tied to an office or sitting in front of a computer all day. Another is, my work will allow me to travel and explore the world. So once you've kind of mapped out and identified these must-have components or definite components, you can decide what careers meet your requirements. Maybe these must-haves point you to a career as a marine biologist or a paralegal, but now you've designed the career you want based on what's most important to you.
Yeah, I really like that because it's kind of like one of the resources that you gave a couple weeks ago of the one from the school.
Yeah, Rasmussen College,
Yes.
like the roadmap.
Yeah,
Yep.
but I think that this could be a really good like extra step to help you define those things that you want because, maybe you know that you need to work with animals but you don't know what that looks like or what kind of job that looks like, or you know that you want to work remotely but you don't know what type of, I think that's really helpful to have a couple of different prompts to be able to guide you to figure out what things you need to be thinking about to find what you're looking for.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's really important to kind of think about what are the things that are essential to you and most important to you, because otherwise, you don't really have any starting point to go off of.
Right.
So, and one quote from the book that really stuck with me is The Power of Commitment. And so I'm going to read this quote. No universal law says you have to struggle, you just have to be willing. You have to be more committed to having the kind of life you want than you are to the easier road of compromise. You have to be willing to drop the stops, and sometimes when people commit to creating something new in their lives and live that commitment without excuses, their obstacles disappear. And I just encourage all job seekers out there to seek out this book if you're looking for a great resource on building your dream career and finding the path that's going to be really valuable for you.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I know we'll have a link to the book in the show notes, won't we?
We will, yeah.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you, Leila. If you've got a suggestion for her, please send her an email. We'd love to share your idea on the show. Leila's address is leila@maxlist.org. Now let's turn to you, our listeners. Jessica, you drug or brought the Maxlist mailbag into the studio a short while ago.
It's a hefty bag, that's for sure.
It just
It's
keeps
like a
growing
Santa
every
Claus
week.
bag.
Yeah. So you've plucked out a letter from the bag, and whose question are you sharing this week?
Yeah, this week we have a question from Jenna Paulson here in Portland. And she says, I've heard that employers prefer hiring people who already have a job. Why? I lost my last job due to no fault of my own. The company just downsized. Why is being unemployed a mark against me? So I understand where the sentiment is coming from. I understand why it feels this way, that it feels like when you're unemployed, you kind of have these stacks up against you, and that it seems harder to find a job. And, I can't say definitively whether or not that's true. I think it may very well be true for some hiring managers. We've talked about this before, there is bias out there, and people bring that into their hiring lives. And we here at Maxlist are working hard to disseminate some of those things to make those make it more clear that how to combat that. But I know that that's something that can go into things.
Yeah, it is a factor, and I feel for Jenna here because employers, candidly, they tend to have concerns about people who have been out of work, and this can be through no fault of your own.
Yes.
I've certainly been there myself. I've talked on the show about too long periods of unemployment, and as that stretches out, you find, and it's not your imagination, that you're getting fewer and fewer responses unless you take steps to address why that gap is there and what you're doing during that period.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what I was going to go into next. So I'm glad that you jumped into that, because that's what I was going to mention here is that I do think that one reason that this may especially feel this way is that employers like to hire people who are actively working in their field. And so I use the word working loosely to just be engaged and involved in some kind of commitments or extracurriculars or volunteer opportunities, any type of thing that shows that you are invested in that field. And so whether or not you are being compensated or officially on a payroll isn't what I'm emphasizing here. It's the fact that you're actively engaging and working in that field and especially giving back. And so, like I mentioned, things that could be related to that would be volunteering, internships, and the underlying thing is demonstrating your passion and your abilities through a commitment to that work.
I like that, Jessica, because
Thank you.
The reason an employer will know you're out of work is because there's a gap on your resume.
Right.
And so your challenge is filling that gap. And if you don't have a paid position, it is perfectly okay to put a volunteer position in there.
Absolutely.
And
I would encourage that.
Yeah.
You know, if you are demonstrating either giving skills to an organization from your expertise and your past experiences, or if you are gaining skills and experiences through that opportunity, that's definitely experience. And that can be, I even have on my resume, I use relevant experience or professional experience, I think is what I say, so that it's not necessarily that these are my hired positions, but these are opportunities and positions that I've held that that may or may not be paid, but that are still contributing to the community involvement and the sort of along the same lines of the work that I'm doing in general. And so I would also encourage Jenna to, while you're in between and while you're laid off, and I really am sorry that happened, because I know that can feel really bad, especially when you haven't prepared for that. Oftentimes, being laid off or let go can sometimes be harder than when you quit your job, because it wasn't your decision and you feel the lack of control there. But I do encourage Jenna and anyone in this scenario to get involved and give back and demonstrate your value with organizations that are doing the type of work that you want to do, or even along the same lines of the skills that you have. And so this will give you a couple different benefits. It will give you a purpose while you're not working. It'll allow you to help others, and it will also get you to meet and get in front of new people that you may not be meeting otherwise, that you can develop those connections. And we've talked about this multiple times. You never know who those people might know that could connect you into a position that you could be easily hired from or within. And I would also say that employers can also tell. This is one other just piece of advice for anyone going through the job search process. Is to stay positive about this. I think employers can tell when someone has a chip on their shoulder about something, about anything, or if you feel that the cards are stacked against you. And so making sure that you process your emotions before you go into, especially the interview process, so that, or I mean, just the job search process in general as well, just to make sure that you're in, a positive zone where you can be able to talk about your skills and your strengths and your experiences without having the weight of that loss of job on top of you. Because if you do feel like this was an unfair, which it probably was, and I think, but I also want to reiterate, this is not an isolated thing. Almost everyone has been laid off or fired or anything like that. So it doesn't reflect poorly on you as a human. It just sometimes unfortunately happens. And I think that focusing on what you do have and what you have to offer rather than your circumstances of what happened will really benefit you in the long run. So I'd love to hear what else you guys would have to say.
Yeah, Jessica, I thought you did a great job answering that question. And I would just completely agree with you and say that it's really just about how you frame that time where you were unemployed.
Absolutely.
Because I think if you come at it negatively and are like, oh, I've been unemployed for 4 months, and you just approach it from a negative standpoint in an interview, that'll really come across to the hiring manager. But if you come at it from a positive perspective and say, I spent all of this time volunteering at this local organization that I'm really passionate about, and I've learned all these great skills. Mm-hmm. Or, maybe you've taken some time to identify your career goals and, maybe outside of volunteering, if there's something else you've done that's really valuable and you can demonstrate to employers that you've made the most of your time unemployed, I think that's what will matter most to them at the end of the day.
Yeah. And no, I think that's really important. And even just being able to reframe it by saying, this was a surprise that I didn't expect to lose this job because I really enjoyed what I was doing before, but it was a welcome respite from, the hubbub, and I was able to do X, Y, and Z while I was looking for other things. And I think that that's exactly right, is reframing it to position what you are doing rather than what happened to you or what you haven't been
Exactly,
doing.
yeah.
Yeah, talk about the present, not the past.
That's right.
And talk about the future, where you want to go and how you're using the time you have now to get there. 2 quick tactical suggestions. Sometimes with professionals, they take consulting projects.
Yep.
And they might do a contract or 2 and just use their last name and put that down as the Smith Group. And that's how they describe what they're doing. And they name the 1 or 2 or more clients they might have. When I went through 2 long periods of unemployment, what I did was I volunteered on congressional campaigns.
Oh, great.
Nobody asked me if Joe Kennedy for Congress paid me or if Ron Wyden for U.S. Senate paid me.
Absolutely.
But
You were
everybody
doing
saw
work.
the brand.
Yep.
And I walked away with great connections, a wonderful experience, and a good letter of reference. Eventually, when I did find, as my career progressed, those 3 6-month stints disappeared from my resume because you don't have to account for the last 6 months
Right.
in 1996. So it's a phase you're going through, Jenna. You're not crazy. Sadly, some employers do not want to talk to people who are out of work. I've been there, and I think many of our listeners, as Jessica said, have been there too. So the question is, what can you control? And you can control how you use your time now and how you describe that.
That's right. And good luck. It's not going to be forever. So keep your head up during this time and stay active, and good luck.
Well, thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Jenna, for the question. If you've got a question for Jessica, send her an email. Her address is jessica@maxlist.org. You can also call that listener line. The number is area code 716-JOB-TALK, or post your question on the Max List Facebook group. However you send your question, if we use it on the show, we'll send you a copy of our book, Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. We'll be back in a moment, and when we return, I'll talk with this week's guest expert, Sara Holtz, about how to build your network strategically. We live in a digital world, and what we do online can make all the difference in a job search. Consider this. In a recent survey, 98% of recruiters say they use LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter to find candidates. If you're not on these platforms, you're invisible to employers. Yes, social media can be overwhelming, especially for baby boomers like me. That's why I built my free online course, How to Wow and Woo Employers Online. In 3 lessons, we show you how to make the most of social media in your job search. You'll learn what matters most to employers who check you out online, how to create and manage social profiles that attract the attention of hiring managers, and how to use your social accounts to grow and serve your professional network. To sign up for this free course, visit maxlist.org/wow. Again, that's maxlist.org/wow. Now, let's get back to the show. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Sara Holtz. Sara Holtz is passionate about helping women succeed in the workplace, and she hosts the podcast Advice to My Younger Me. In each episode, Sara and her guest, another successful woman, provide clear, practical career advice. Sara began her podcast after an accomplished career as a business lawyer, a senior executive at Fortune 500 companies, and as a nationally recognized expert helping women lawyers achieve career success. She's a graduate of Yale College and Harvard Law School, and she joins us today from San Francisco. Well, Sara, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure, and I'm very excited about our topic because we're big networking nerds up here at Find Your Dream Job, and we're going to be talking about how to build a network strategically. Why is that important, Sara?
Well, I think networking sometimes gets a bad rap because people think of it as going to those daunting and unproductive networking events and handing out their cards. But the truth is, if you think about your network and how you build it, both intentionally and with an intention to leverage it, having a network is both really valuable exercise and also something which is going to reap you great benefits in your career.
So how do you recommend people get started? What should they be thinking about? Because I agree, when I talk to job seekers, people are thinking about that function room at the airport Holiday Inn and the person who's going around measuring success by the number of cards they collect. But what should people do as they think about building a network strategically? How do they start?
Well, let me take a step back and say what a well-constructed strategic network can do for you. So the first thing that it can do is that it can provide you with information, which can be useful to you both in finding a job and in doing well in the job you have. So, for example, your network might be able to help you identify who would be a good headhunter for a job that you're trying to pursue. Or it might be nothing more than suggesting a good restaurant to take a potential client to in San Francisco that's trendy enough to be cool, but not really noisy. Or it might be information which allows you to understand, so who's the hiring manager in this company? So that's the first thing that your network can do for you if it's well constructed, is it can provide you with information. The second thing that it can do is it can provide you with resources. Like, what's a great book to read about time management? Because I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out how to organize my day. Or I'm a first line manager. I've never had this experience before. Is there a course that I could take that might help me do that? And then the third thing that your network can do for you is to provide you with advice. How do you ask for a raise? Should you go to business school, given what your career path is, whatever it might be. And then, finally, and it's maybe what we typically think about when we think about networking, is that your network can provide you with introductions to people that you want to meet who can help you find a new job, can help you transition industries, whatever it may be. So it's important to think about the ways in which your network can help you, and then to think about, so what are my goals? What am I trying to achieve in my career? Not in my networking, but in my career, or maybe even in life. And when you're clear about what that is, and obviously that's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today, and I'm sure you've talked about that in previous episodes with your other guests. But when you get a clear picture of what it is that you're trying to achieve, I want a new job. I want to get promoted within my current job. I want to figure out what the skills are that I need to be able to be more effective in the jobs that I have. When you figure out what your career goals are at this particular juncture, you can start to think about, so who are the people who might help me actually achieve those goals? And that's what I mean about building a strategic network, which is to be clear about your goals and then to build your network around the kind of support you need through other people to achieve those goals.
That's a very good description. And what I love about it is the examples you gave, particularly in the beginning, are things that people are likely already doing. They are turning to friends for advice about restaurants or suggestions about books or advice perhaps about making a decision about graduate school. And so I bring this up because often when I speak to people, job seekers, they say, well, I don't have much of a network. I don't know anyone. But everybody has a network, don't they, Sara?
Yeah, and I'd like to highlight that because I think that many people underestimate what their network is. And when I think about networking, I think about the fact that there are actually two groups of people within your network. There's what I call your core network. And your core network might be as few as or as many as 15 people. And these are the people who you could ask to do a significant favor for you, drive you to the airport, babysit for your dog overnight, things like that. And typically, if we map people's networks, and I'm going to suggest that people actually do that in just a moment, that number's around 15. And then there's the broader network, which is literally all the people that you know, that you've had contact with, that you're connected to. And as we know from our experience with LinkedIn, that can be, in the hundreds of people. So first of all, you need to be aware that you have those two networks. And I suggest to people that they actually map their network, because as you point out, people often underestimate the size of their network. And typically they also underutilize their networks. So one thing that I suggest that people do in terms of mapping their network is to actually sit down, take a half an hour at Starbucks, and do something like, so who are the people that you work with that you would consider acquaintances, people you would be comfortable sitting down and saying, could I take you out to get a cup of coffee? I have some questions I'd like to ask you. I need your advice on something. Then think about who are the people who you engage in social activities with. Who are the people who invite you over for dinner? Who are the people you might know through organizations you belong to? Who are the people you might know from your church or synagogue activities? Those kinds of people. Think about who are the people who you discuss personal concerns with. Like if you're trying to figure out, should your kid join a traveling soccer team? Or if you're trying to figure out whether or not if you're trying to figure out whether or not your boss is a jerk or whether his demands are realistic, who are those people that you turn to for that kind of advice? And then think about who may have taught you a new skill or introduced you to something new recently. Who is somebody who put you on to a new news feed that you read or a new podcast you listen to, those kinds of things. So who are the people who mentor you or for that matter, for whom you serve as a mentor? Who are people who have similar interests that you do in political activities or another kind of cause? You belong to the same PTA group or you belong to the same hiking group. And I could go on and on about how you think about mapping your network, but too often people think about it in this very rigid way about like, who do I know who I met at a networking event, or who do I know who I would ask for a job, right? But your network is so much broader than that. And I think it's useful if you go through this mapping exercise that I'm suggesting. And as I said, you can ask lots of different questions as well. Who did I go to college with? Who do my kids play with? Whatever it may be. It then starts really opening you up to the notion that actually you do have a network, that probably the issue is not that you don't have a network, but that you haven't figured out how you can leverage them to use them for the goals that you have.
Well, let's talk about that, because you've laid out a great series of questions people can use to identify the groups that they're already connected to and begin to appreciate the value those groups offer them. But I see people struggle, and I bet you do too, Sara, with what to ask these folks. I think many job seekers, they invite someone out to coffee. They say, well, I'd love to pick your brain. And they're not quite sure what to do, and they struggle in that conversation. How should people approach that?
I guess there's two different questions. One of them is, what could I ask those people about? And secondly, how do I go about asking them, right? So those are kind of two different issues. So the first one is, I go back to what I said at the outset, which is you can ask people for introductions. You can ask them for resources. You can ask them for advice. You can ask them for different kinds of information that might be useful to you. And again, the point I want to make here is I think sometimes people underestimate the kinds of help that they can get for their networks, because all they're thinking about is who can give me a job, for example. And your network can give you lots of steps which are intermediate to getting a job. Like before you can get a job, you need to know who the hiring manager is. Before you can get a job, you need to know who's looking to hire. Before you can get a job, you may need to know what critical skills are for people who perform in that job and how you might go about getting them. So I want to expand the way that people think about networking to think about it in some way other than it's meeting customers, it's meeting hiring managers, it's meeting potential clients. So then the second question is, so how do you make an ask for help? So I think the first thing you need to do is to be really careful and thoughtful about making your ask something specific and something that the person you're asking of can actually deliver on. So what do I mean by that? So oftentimes people are like, I actually got a phone call today that was like this. Somebody had connected to me through somebody who I'm a close friend of, and this person is a close friend of that person. And she called me up and she said, I'm a young lawyer and I'd like advice. And I'm like, great, what kind of advice? And she's like, well, what kind of advice would you give to a young lawyer? Well, that's such a broad request. And ultimately, after I was, spent a polite amount of time in my interaction with her, I said to her, the next time that you face a challenge that you'd actually like advice on, please feel free to give me a call. So in my view, her ask was a terrible ask because it was basically asking me to do all the work to figure out, well, what kind of advice would I give her? I've written a book about things like this. So obviously that was not a 5-minute or 10-minute conversation. And similarly, let's say that you're interested in getting a job in the tech arena in San Francisco. So instead of saying to somebody, hey, if you ever hear from somebody who's looking for somebody with my set of skills, whatever those may be, ask instead, do you know somebody who I could connect with at XYZ company that I've already done the research to know that that's the kind of company that I would like to work at? So in other words, to make your ask very specific and very actionable on the part of the other person. Now, that's going to require you to do some work. You have to actually research what are potential companies in the Bay Area that might be of interest to you or that might be looking for people with your skills. But no matter how hard that task is, it's much more likely that you're going to be motivated to do that task than the person you're asking.
Agreed. And I've certainly had my share of conversations, just as you described, where people come and they have a few general questions. Usually they're struggling with their job search goal and they don't quite know where they're going, and they think they should have these conversations, but they don't know what to ask for. So they end up asking very general things like, could you look at my resume? Do you have any general advice? And it's a lost opportunity, isn't it, when you reach out to someone and you don't have a specific ask?
I'm going to actually amplify that and say, not only is it a lost opportunity, but it definitely doesn't leave that person with a very positive impression of you. In other words, first of all, it leaves you with the impression that they're not very focused. And secondly, it leaves you with the impression that they really weren't conscious of the fact that they were asking a favor of you. They're asking you to invest your time in helping them, and they weren't really very gracious about how they treated that opportunity.
So how do people get clear? I mean, I think you've laid this out. You need to know what you want and have a specific request. Any other tips about how to arrive at that ask?
Well, again, I think you need to really prepare for it. And I think that happens not frequently enough. And preparing for it can both be sitting down and thinking about, like, how do I think this person could help me? And what's a specific ask that I could make of them? Could they introduce me to somebody? Are they aware of a specific connection at a company? Things like that. And the second part is sometimes that requires doing some hard research and actually doing that research.
And I can imagine listeners are thinking right now, Sara, two questions. One, won't someone be offended if I make a specific request? Like, could you introduce me to this lady at that company? And second, why would anybody take a meeting like this? what would you say to that listener?
Well, let's divide those into the two questions. Are they going to be offended? I'm guessing you're really overestimating people's reaction to that. I think that's the simplest possible thing. If they don't want to help you, they'll say, no, I don't. I don't think most people are offended at the asks you make. I think they may be offended, again, if they feel like you're wasting their time, which is true if your ask is not specific enough. And the second part of your question, I forgot that.
Why would a busy person, especially, but anybody, take a meeting like this where you're going to ask them for their time and their help? Aren't most people going to say no? I've had job seekers say that to me.
Sure. Well, first of all, some people will say no. But there's lots of reasons why people will do it. One of them is maybe they like you. Hard to believe, right? Maybe they want to pay it forward. Maybe they're hoping that the connection between the two of you actually will be valuable to them as well. For example, in this young woman who called me, I actually like having in my network younger people. That's who my podcast audience is, younger career professionals. So that potentially could have been a good connection for me in the sense that, sometimes I like to call them up and say, I'm thinking about doing an episode on this. Is this an issue that you find troubling? Or can you give me an example of when you did have a problem around this issue and what did it look like? Or who would you like to hear as a guest, right? So there may be this mutually beneficial notion to it. A lot of people like to help. And one of the things, again, with a specific ask, the benefit of the specific ask is it actually takes very little effort on the person you're making the requests of. Takes very little effort for them to help you. But from your perspective, it's incredibly valuable. And from my standpoint, those are the best kind of favors. Something which is very valuable to you and not very difficult for the other person to do because they're happy to do it. It's no big deal. I'm happy to forward your email. I'm happy to forward your resume to somebody, particularly if you've written the draft email of what I'm going to send. But that can be incredibly valuable to you. So I'd say get over that.
Good advice. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. I could talk for a long time about it, but we do have to bring it to a close. Sara, tell us what's next for you.
Well, every 2 weeks, I have an episode of my Advice to My Younger Me podcast, and we talk about many issues which affect career success for millennial women, professional millennial women. So I hope people will take a listen to that. That's Advice to My Younger Me, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And we've got, I think, in our next sessions that's coming up is How to Survive Being Fired.
Okay, I'll tune into that. That's happened to me twice, so I can't wait to hear the advice. And I have listened to your show, and I do hope our listeners will check out your program. It's very valuable. You've got some terrific guests and wonderful advice there.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Well, Sara, I know people can learn more about you and your show by visiting your website, tomyyoungerme.me.
tomyyounger.me.
Oh,
right.
Thank you. And we'll be sure to include the correct URL in the show notes. Sara, thanks for being on the show this week.
Of course. Take care.
We're back in the studio with Leela and Jessica. I really enjoyed that conversation with Sara.
That was excellent. She had so much good content to share.
It was really insightful, yeah.
What were some of the highlights for you?
Well, I loved how she broke everything down into very clear, actionable steps that people can take. We talked about that at the beginning of the episode, clear and actionable steps to break down a nebulous topic, especially how to get a job and how to navigate job searching is really important. And I liked her focus on that your network is not just who you meet at events or who can get you a job, but it's, and you touched upon this as well, is that it's about, you have in your that's giving you advice and information and resources and are there for you to just be a support system. And so I thought that was really important. And I liked her emphasis on sitting down and mapping out who those people are and at what sort of levels that is, or those are. And so, and I also really liked her focus on being clear about both what you want and especially what you are requesting of people to be able to maximize those conversations when you do ask your network for any types of advice or information or resources or favors. Being clear, knowing who to ask so that you're not asking the wrong people, but also being clear about what it is that you're asking for them and making sure that you can reciprocate and it's not a one-sided conversation. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is something we've probably talked a lot about on the podcast, or I've noticed it in various blogs around the website as well. But not just asking somebody for coffee and saying like, oh, can I pick your brain? Like that very generic kind of standard question. I think she did a great job of explaining why you need to come to every interaction you have with very specific questions. That way you can get really specific, advice or actionable stuff for your career instead of just getting a general piece of advice from somebody that might not be very useful.
And letting that person know what it is you want to speak to them about ahead of time so that they can be prepared with various resources or whatever it is that they can give to you. So it's not just that they show up and then they don't really know exactly what they're talking about, because that can catch them off guard as well. And I liked her focus on talking about how not being prepared and not being clear about those can actually make your connection weaker because it takes advantage of that relationship.
Yeah, totally. And I really liked how she mentioned that you should in advance map out your network and identify the people who are going to help you meet your career goals instead of just asking random people to coffee, which I feel like is what I would do and a lot of other people would do potentially.
Well, and especially when you're younger and you don't really know, and you just are like, well, I just want some guidance. I want some help. And this person seems to have their life together and I want to gather that from them. But it is a lot that you're asking of somebody if you're just saying tell me what to do, because they don't know how to help you if you don't know how to ask, or if you don't know what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of those conversations because I think people don't know how to prepare for these meetings. And so often people come to see me and for an informational interview, and I'll end up asking them a few basic questions about their goals and the companies or nonprofits that interest them. And it's the kind of conversation you might have with a counselor at a career services office or at an employment office, and you should have that talk. But if you're asking someone for an informational interview, think about how they can best help you. And if you need general career advice, it's probably not somebody who is a leader in your field. There are probably much more valuable things they can do for you than review your resume and give you some general advice.
Yeah, and I liked Sarah's emphasis on doing that research on your own ahead of time so that you are coming to those meetings and you're prepared once you're asking for whatever it is you're asking for. Anyway, it was a really great conversation. Yeah. I agree with you that I think we all three of us could have talked about it for a long time.
Yeah. We could, yeah.
Yeah, three networking nerds around the table here, and proud of it. So, well, thank you both, and thank you, Sara, for all that terrific advice, and you, our listeners, for downloading today's episode of Find Your Dream Job. So put your best foot forward online today. Get my free online course, How to Wow and Woo Employers Online. Go to maxlist.org/wow. Again, that's maxlist.org/wow. And join us next Wednesday. Our special guest will be Justin Dux. He'll explain how to read between the lines of a job posting. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.